Hello, welcome back to the Revolutionary Communist Podcast. My name is Joel Bergman. I'm here with Marco Lagrada, and we are here to discuss Mark Carney. He's the new Prime Minister. He was elected in late April, April 28th. The new government has been in place for a month and a half now, and we have some indications of what this government is all about. And we believe that what the government has done so far has completely confirmed every single thing we said about Mark Carney in the election and subsequently. That this so-called lesser evilism that a lot of people were arguing for, including many in the labor movement, many on the left were arguing that they needed to vote Mark Carney to block Pierre Poilievre. Well, we're here today to review how that argument is shaping up. So, yes, I guess as a brief introduction to this, as a reminder, Carney rode a wave of anti-Trump Canadian nationalism to probably the biggest political comeback in the history of the country. One of the biggest in the history of the world, probably. I think maybe Trump's comeback beats it. That was quite amazing. But yes, a huge comeback, rode this wave of anti-Trump Canadian nationalism. A lot of high hopes in Carney, thinking he's going to stand up to Trump. People think elbows up, defend Canada, defend Canadian jobs, defend Canada against all of the threats from Donald Trump. How is that going? I guess this is how we got here, and we got to review the situation. So I don't know, Marco, you have a few words maybe to just introduce in the general situation?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Carney was supposed to be the lesser evil, so-called. He's now been, it's I think more than a month since the election. I remember we released our perspectives document, Canadian perspectives document, which people can read online. And we made a number of predictions, I guess you could say, in that document, that despite all of this highfalutin language, all this bluster about standing up to Trump, elbows up, like he said, building one Canadian economy. Honestly, very exaggerated statements like Canada is going to undergo the biggest transformation, he said, since the end of the Second World War. He talked about Canada replacing potentially the role of the United States on a world stage. Talked about Canada becoming the most powerful economy, he said, in the G7, which, you put that another way, that's like saying that Canada is going to be the most powerful nation on earth. Because the United States is the most powerful economy in the G7. You had a lot of people on the left who thought, Mark Carney was maybe not perfect, but certainly not as bad as Poilievre. They talked about Poilievre like, some people talk about Adolf Hitler. He's going to come, he's going to attack immigrants, he's going to attack, people in the LGBT community, he's going to attack workers, trade unionists, so on. We're about a month out since the election or more. All of those things that people warned us about Poilievre, Carney has done.
Yep.
And honestly, I think he's done it maybe even faster than Poilievre might have done. It's honestly quite stunning what we've seen in the past month, but attacks on immigrants, defense spending, which I think we're going to talk about in a moment, and so on. I mean, you can go down the list. But it's really exploded, and I would say confirmed a lot of what we said leading up to the election, that this isn't a lesser evil, but we have our two evils.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing the results of that right now.
Yeah, so that's precisely it. It is astounding the speed at which, even prior to the election, Mark Carney was the Prime Minister prior to the election. He wasn't elected by anybody except a small number of liberals. But what he did, and we mentioned this in our election articles and stuff, is implement a bunch of Poilievre's campaign promises. That is what he chose to do. So I think even before the election, it was very obvious what direction he was headed in. he has a different tone than Poilievre. So he speaks in a different way. He doesn't denounce people. He's not ruffling those feathers. But in content, which is the most important thing, he is doing what Poilievre would have done. Because actually, a lot of this is what Canadian capitalism needs. And so any Canadian capitalist politician, whether liberal or conservative, will have to do these things. So on the anti-Trump stuff, I thought maybe we could just start on that, because that was, I'd say, the dominant question in the election, at least for the people that voted Carney. That was the dominant question, was an opposition to Trump. It was a shock about what Trump was doing, and a kind of a fear about it. And people voted for Carney to protect them. Respected central banker guy with experience, etc. But yeah, right away. So the election happened on April 28th. Carney went and visited Trump on May 6th. And I think a lot of people maybe saw some clips from that. But, if we take him at his word, which maybe I think we should, this is what he said. He thanked Trump for his leadership. He said that he was a transformational president. And he actually didn't just say that, which could have just been whatever, nice words. But he actually specified that Carney himself considered that he was elected on similar issues that Trump was elected on. And he described those as border security, fentanyl. He said securing the world. It's related to this. You mentioned defense spending. I want to just say that's a euphemism. It actually has very little to do with defense. This is offense spending, military spending, in a country like Canada for sure. He said, securing the borders, defense security, etc. This is what Carney says. So right out of the gate, he basically was agreeing with Trump, and as we will show, capitulating to him. I think that's the main thing. You even saw a bit of this at the G7. Maybe we could address that before. I think we should get into the military spending thing. But the G7 took place this past weekend. You had most of the major world leaders. Well, some of them. Some of them are absent, obviously, because there's a big imperialist clash going on. But it was hosted in Alberta, in a small town outside of Calgary. And Trump was there. Trump was invited. He was there. And maybe we could just say a few words about the G7 briefly. Like, what was the content of the G7? What kind of came out of it? Did Canada manage to wrestle Donald Trump back from some of his demands? I don't know if you have a few things to say about that, Marco.
Right from the get-go, I don't know if you saw that first interaction between Carney and Trump. But, Carney, some people talked about, he's this, brave figure who's going to stand up to Trump and, so on and so forth. To be honest, that initial interaction was a bit cringy.
Yeah.
If you like. He started by, I think, wishing Trump a happy birthday. Because it was Trump's birthday just a little while ago. Actually, the same day as that military parade that took place in Washington. But started by wishing him a happy birthday. Wished the American military a happy birthday, because I think it's the 250th anniversary. But anyway, just heaping praise upon praise. And what was notable is that all of this talk about Canada's not for sale and elbows up, standing up to the United States, was totally and wholly absent. It was just praise upon praise. Of course, with Trump, that wasn't the case. Actually, Trump's first comment was actually a criticism of the other G7 countries. He said, the G7 used to be the G8. But then some stupid people removed Russia, which was a very bad decision. And he said, that included Obama at the time. And he said, also, your leader, Justin Trudeau. Actually, it wasn't
was Harper.
Trudeau at the time. It was Harper at the time. But he said, your esteemed leader also made the stupid decision. And of course, you look at Carney, he's just standing there with an awkward look on his face. But I think what this reveals in a small ways is the real balance of forces, that Canada is not a strong economic power. It doesn't have the economic muscle, the military muscle, to stand up in any significant way to the United States. And like we said, at a certain point, despite all of this talk about Canadian nationalism, Carney would eventually have to kiss the ring and make serious concessions. And I think that's a window into that, if you like. Obviously, we'll talk more about concessions he has made, because he has made already a number of major concessions. We'll talk about that. But this is the balance of forces. Carney has, if you like, been forced to come back down to earth at the end of the day.
Yeah, so no mention of any of the events that's happening inside the U.S. No mention of that. Basically, Trump using the military, using the National Guard and the military to repress his own population. No mention of that. I thought, we're opposed to the... No. Now, a lot of liberals I've seen in the news and stuff, they're basically making the argument that you have to ingratiate yourself to Trump and not criticize him on secondary issues, what they consider secondary issues, in order to get a deal. The most important thing is deals. We can get into that in a minute, but so far that's their argument. They say we have to just not rock the boat, and Trudeau made a mistake because he criticized Trump too much, and that pissed him off, and so that ruined things. But this seems to be what's happening, is they're basically letting Trump do whatever he wants, and they haven't got a deal yet. Now, one thing that came out of the G7 was that they committed, and this was confirmed, I believe, by the Prime Minister's office, that they will make a trade deal in 30 days. So we'll see. We got a month. That's not very long. And we'll see. So far, Trump has not removed any of the tariffs. Actually, he increased the tariff on steel and aluminum, and Canada did not respond. So we'll see what comes of that.
Just on that quickly, because in that same interaction I mentioned, one of the other things Trump said was, he said, as you know, I'm a tariff man.
Yeah.
I like my tariffs. And what he was saying is that any deal that they end up working out, I think tariffs will still be a significant factor with whatever deal they end up striking. And it's also worth pointing to, because you had one country so far which has struck a deal with the United States, which is Britain.
Yeah.
Although if you look at that deal, people who have analyzed that deal, in fact, it's not really a deal at all. It's more sort of like a broad promise, a broad, vague framework for a deal. And also in the case of Britain, there are still tariffs against Britain, despite that deal. So this is worth considering that, first of all, 30 days is very optimistic. They've said it's incredibly aspirational. But whatever comes out of this is not necessarily going to be a return to the way things were before. It'll be, okay, a deal potentially, but it will be a deal on Trump's terms fundamentally. And I think this is an important point to make.
Yeah. So I think we can get into some of the economics, the trade deal and stuff, more later, because that is fundamentally what this is going to come down to. And this is really what what will actually really matter for people's living conditions in Canada as well. But before we get into that, I think one big one that's been in the news lately, last couple of weeks, is the question of military spending. And this has been, just to remind everyone, this has been one of Trump's main demands. Even going back to his first term, he made waves criticizing NATO, saying that NATO partners, which is a military alliance of Western imperialist countries, saying they're not pulling their weight, they're just relying on America to protect them. And he even made jibes at Europe saying, well, if you don't pull your weight, I'll just get Russia to, I'll just tell Putin to attack you, basically. So that could just be Trump, whatever comments. But the fact of the matter is he was pushing for all NATO partners to pay 2%. That was the first demand of their GDP on military spending. So Canada historically used to have quite high military spending. Used to have one of the biggest navies in the world after World War II. And then during the post-war period, had a certain amount of military spending, during the Cold War. But that, after the Soviet Union collapse, really fell. I believe it fell to around 1%, even under Stephen Harper. Now, Trudeau he acquiesced to pressures from the business elite, from Trump actually himself, and increased that, although very slightly. I think it went up to about 1.37%. And this was still very short of the NATO target, 2%. Trudeau had promised that he would get to the 2% target, but he did it by 2032. So a long ways away. Obviously, this irritated Trump. Carney, in the election, promised he would do it by 2030. I believe Bill Blair, is he still the defense minister? I don't know if he is. I don't think he is. Anyway, he had said he could do it even quicker. But I think nobody actually thought that what happened would happen. Carney, I think was it last week?
I think so.
I think it was last week, maybe the week before. He announced that he would do it. I believe he said he would do it this year, in 2025, maybe 2026. But he said this year, actually. So that's a massive fast track to get to the 2% target. And actually, I just have to underline, he was not elected on that. He did not run on that. So what is he doing? What pressure is he bending to? Is there a demand amongst poor working class Canadians saying, oh, the biggest problem in my life now is that the Canadian military isn't funded enough? No, people can't afford to pay the bills. The rents are too high. The cost of groceries has gone up. Their wages are stagnant. There's not enough good jobs. Unemployment is going up. And meanwhile, the government is bending to pressures from the business community, from Trump, etc., from NATO to increase. And he's going to do it this year. But what does that mean? I guess we should address that. That's not military spending in a vacuum, right? What is that going to mean? You want to say a few things about that?
Yeah, this is a very important issue. And it's a very serious change. Like you said, Canadian policy since the fall of the Soviet Union essentially was essentially a policy of relying on the U.S. Security umbrella to protect Canada and to protect Canadian interests. And throughout that period, defense spending was kept at a very low rate, for even by the standard of other NATO countries, as you pointed out. I think Canada is something in like the bottom 5, with countries like Spain and so on. You mentioned Harper. I think this is interesting because a lot of, maybe we have some younger viewers who don't remember Harper, but for those who do remember the Harper years, I remember the Harper years. At the time, he was described as, a warmonger, very pro-military, very pro-intervention, pro-imperialist. I think even today, a lot of people remember him that way. But under Harper, defense spending was more or less kept to around, like you said, 1%. Because even Harper recognized that to go from 1 to 2%, which was always the NATO target, even during Harper's time, would have meant enormous political costs. In other words, you're going to have to get that money from somewhere. It's going to mean cuts to social programs. There's going to mean cuts to other things that Canadians rely on. I think that helps put into context what Carney is doing, because he's doing it, I think, 5 or 6 years earlier than what Trudeau originally promised, which, by the way, Trudeau's commitment was also an increase of the timeline. So Carney's massively accelerated that to try and hit it this year. If you look at it in dollar terms, now it's hard to say because there's a million different ways that you could calculate defense spending. But most serious estimates that I've seen So that would mean increasing the defense budget this upcoming year from around 40 billion, which is where it roughly sits, to effectively 60 billion, which would represent an increase of $20 billion for the army. That's a serious cost.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly clear why they're doing this. You mentioned Carney did not run on this. I think Carney's commitment was something like 2030. So this is a very serious change. It's not what he promised. Why are they doing this? They're doing this because of Trump. It's perfectly clear. In fact, we don't have to guess at this. They've said it openly. I think it was the public safety minister who came out. This was shortly after they announced the defense spending. And he says, well, we're hoping that this will address some of the irritants of the Trump government.
Yeah.
I think irritants was the word they used. So it's perfectly clear what they're doing here. They've received enormous pressure from Trump. Trump probably said, listen, if you want a deal, then you're going to have to significantly increase your defense spending, and you're going to have to increase it fast. And of course, despite all this elbows up talk, Carney said, yes, sir, clearly. And now we're going to have to deal with the consequences of that, which is, like I said, it's an enormous cost, and the money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, on that point, don't take it from us, the Parliamentary Budget Office, which calculates how much things would cost and how you would balance the books and everything, basically says it's impossible for the government to reach that level of military spending without cutting from social services. That's the government itself stating this. So yes, one of the campaigns that, we're members of the Revolutionary Communist International, and last year we raised this campaign against militarism and war. And yes, some of the main slogans we raise is books, not bombs, healthcare, not warfare, precisely because this is not an isolated issue. It's connected to everything else, right? That the increased military spending will lead to cuts. So increased military spending is not in the interest of working class Canadians, working class people in Canada. It's directly opposed to our interest. And obviously, it's just used for the interests of Canadian imperialism abroad, which does not benefit us. Another thing, which I don't know if I described as an elephant in the room because it's being openly talked about here, but so this would represent a huge increase, and the money has to come from somewhere. And Carney so far has been a bit vague on that. I think, it's 20 billion he'd have to get up to, or he'd have to increase military spending to 20 billion just this year, and it would have to be every year, and it would probably be increasing, right? Because GDP goes up. He said 9. Now, Carney likes his sort of creative accounting, which he's always lowballing things that are unpopular, and I don't know how he's going to do that. And it's even an open question of whether or not he'll be able to get up to the 2 this year. They're going to increase wages. They're going to basically make the Coast Guard part of the... They're going to militarize the Coast Guard, make it part of the military. So they're going to do things like that. They pledged at the G7 another, I think it's over $4 billion to go to Ukraine, which is going to be included in military spending. It's a funny form of defense, giving billions of dollars to a war in a far-off land. But yes, they're going to include all this. But the elephant in the room here is the Golden Dome. So Trump has come out. Basically, this is, if you haven't been paying attention, this is a kind of modeled off the Israeli Iron Dome. Although this is actually going to be a step further because they're going to put basically satellite. I don't know if it's going to be lasers and all sorts of stuff that's going to enable, apparently, I think it's an open question of whether or not this can actually be built. Them to protect, and they want to protect North America, not just America, the whole continent, from China, Russia, whatever. The price tag on this, with a system that could completely nullify any attacks, as a defense system, apparently. This, The price tag on this is absolutely astronomical. Carney has confirmed that they want to be a part of Golden Dome, which is also a shift in position because the Canadian government refused to participate in similar type initiatives going all the way back to the 1980s. There was the so-called Star Wars program. I think that was Reagan, was it? And now this, and Carney confirms that they want to be a part of the Golden Dome. And if you think about it, America needs Canada to be part of the Golden Dome, because how the hell are they going to protect the continent? They can't really protect themselves without protecting the North, which is also why Trump wants Greenland. This is melting. It's opening up. There's trade routes. Russia and China are starting to explore. They want to protect that. This is an imperialist rivalry. So they need this. Now, the price tag, like I said, is absolutely astronomical. I think the other day, Trump was saying it was about $60 billion if Canada wanted to participate, an extra $60 billion. I think he said 71 the other day. Trump likes to increase the numbers. But he said, he connected it to the annexation thing. He said, if Canada remains an independent country, they would have to spend that amount of money. That's a crazy amount of money. It would be, I'm trying to just do a brief calculation. That would be a lot of money. That would be about 15-20% of Canadian GDP, just that amount. But Trump says if you don't do that, then, or if you don't want to do that, you can just become a 51st state and then you won't have to pay anything. He said they're considering the offer. Obviously, I don't know. Carney's been pretty categorical on not becoming the 51st state. But yeah, this is a big elephant in the room. Now, if they capitulate to that, if they want to participate in this Golden Dome, they're going to have to contribute something. I don't imagine that Trump is just going to go, oh yeah, don't worry, we'll just protect you for nothing. So I guess all things to say, Carney is capitulating to Trump on military spending. He wants to join the Golden Dome. He's capitulated to the 2% target. But the NATO and Trump have now upped it to 3.5 to 5%. So there'll be a lot of pressure on Canada to get up to that, which means, like we said, cuts to social services, education, healthcare, etc. And this is one of the biggest things that Carney is not fighting Trump on.
Yeah.
He's actually completely capitulating to him.
Just, a couple of thoughts on this, because, first of all, on terms of the Golden Dome, I think, first of all, we should take it seriously, because I know a lot of people have thought, okay, this is just, Trump, being Trump.
Yeah.
But the fact is, I mean, I've even seen some articles saying that it actually is potentially possible to build it, although it would be exceptionally more expensive than anything what Trump is currently promising.
Yeah.
I've seen, $500, $600, $700 billion. And also, like you said, Trump wasn't the first one to advance this idea, but it was Reagan with the so-called Star Wars program, which also included satellites for defense of the United States. But there are serious indications that Canada is looking to participate. I think Carney has suggested, I think his words were that it makes sense for Canada. Also, there was an interesting article, I think it was in the CBC, but they managed to gain access to this working document that was moving between the American and Canadian teams that are involved in these negotiations right now. And it has a list of commitments from Canada and a list of demands from the United States. But one of the top commitments from Canada on that document is Canada joining the Golden Dome. Now, whether that ends up working its way into a final deal is yet to be seen. But the fact is, all of the indications are that Carney, the Canadian government, are very serious about joining this. And this would represent a massive expense to the Canadian government and the Canadian taxpayer. Because you mentioned, it's like the Iron Dome. It is and it isn't. It's the Iron Dome on steroids. Iron Dome is meant to defend Israel. It's a small tiny country. It's meant to defend against mostly the short-range missiles that people like Hamas use. What you're talking about with the Golden Dome is a missile defense system spanning essentially an entire continent using satellites, which would hover over places like Russia and China, which is also incredibly provocative from the standpoint of Russia and China, to have, satellites with military capabilities floating over your country, monitoring your missile silos and so on and so forth, in order to defend against things like intercontinental ballistic missiles. So yeah, Trump says it's 71 American dollars right now for Canada to join, 71 billion. I wouldn't be surprised if that figure goes up, to be honest. So this is very serious, and it's going to represent a serious expense. Also, one other point about, you mentioned defense spending will not benefit Canadians. It's also worth asking, this money that they spend on the army, where's it going to go? A significant number of that new money for the army is going to end up with American companies. It's inevitable. Carney's talked about how 75% of our military purchases are linked to the United States. But the fact is, Canada does not have a strong domestic military industry. There's been talks about joining the Rearm Europe program, which they may move in that direction. However, a lot of that military kit will inevitably have to come from the United States. You have, for example, this commitment to purchase, I think it's something like 80 to 90...
It's 88 F-35s,
88
yeah.
F-35 fighter jets from the United States, which, by the way, they've talked about reviewing that contract. They still haven't canceled that contract. Yeah. Right now, they're still planning to make the full purchase of those F-35s. Also, the cost for that has gone up. It was originally, I think, something in the realm of 18 or 19 billion dollars for the full purchase. But the other day, the Auditor General came out and said that the cost has now gone up to, I think, something like 27 or 28 billion dollars for these fighter jets. And one of the main reasons they cited for the increase of these jets is the increased demand for military hardware resulting from the Ukraine war, which, anyway, shows how all of these events are connected.
Which Canada is funding.
Yeah, but this money is going back into the pockets of big American corporations. They've also placed an order for, if you remember, the HIMARS missiles, which are these long-range missiles that the United States has been supplying to Ukraine. There's also a large order that Carney's placed of that. So this is what this means. When we talk about all this stuff about Canada charting an independent course from the United States, we realize it was all a bunch of hot air.
That's nonsense.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's absolutely nonsense. So military spending, that's one of the big ones that Carney has actually, let's see, is he standing up to Trump? Doesn't seem like it. Seems like complete capitulation to Trump. And is it going to be good for us? No, it is not going to be good for us. Another one, was it last week? Bill C-2, Strong Borders Act, or what it's called, by the Minister of Public Safety put it forward. So this is a big one, immigration. Not just immigration and civil liberties. Like I said right at the beginning, Carney has promised, said he got elected to ensure border security and all that. Which, again, I think is another capitulation to Trump. Who raised this in the first instance? The border security, the fentanyl, immigration, etc., etc. This was Trump. But yeah, what is Bill C-2? It's an omnibus bill. It's a bill with so many things in it. And actually, the problem with omnibus bills that's been widely criticized by civil liberty groups is that you can't really give it proper scrutiny because it's got so many things in it and you can't separate it out. You either vote for it all or you vote it all down. So this is what they're proposing, but maybe we can get into a bit of what's in Bill C-2. That this is one of the first, I think this is the first thing they proposed in the Parliament back, which shows the government priorities. But Marco, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's it does a lot of things, all of them bad. On the immigration, I mean, first of all, the hypocrisy here. And also, look at what's happening right now in the United States.
Yeah.
You have Trump making serious moves against undocumented immigrants. There was and it's clear now that they're going after not just criminals and things like that, which is what he said he would do, but ordinary workers. Anyway, that's a separate discussion. But this has led to an enormous wave of anger, including here in Canada. People are watching it here, watching the news, seeing, the National Guard in Los Angeles, and people are horrified. While this is going on, Carney comes to the Parliament, puts forward this bill, the Safe Borders Act. What it represents is a massive attack, I would say, on undocumented immigrants, people applying for asylum. You look at the things that it does. Honestly, I'm not sure even Poilievre would have gone this far, this fast. They've essentially removed all due process in applying for asylum to Canada. Essentially, you now have a situation with this bill where the Minister of Immigration can cancel any asylum claim for any person for any reason whatsoever. I think, if it's a threat to the Canadian national security.
Yeah.
But of course, this is incredibly vague. It can essentially be used. It can be used to justify anything. They've made it so that if you've been in Canada for a year or more, you can no longer apply for asylum. Mm-hmm. So this is obviously targeting a lot of these international students who have come to Canada in the last period. They've cracked down on things like student visas. They've made it harder for these students to stay in the country. And so some of them have tried to apply for asylum in order to remain in Canada because that's what they were promised. You come, you work hard, you pay your way, and you can make a life for yourself in Canada. Carney, for political reasons, now has said, no, that's not going to happen. And they've now made it more difficult for those people to stay. I'd also add about this, the 1 year requirement, because some people were asking, well, why is it 1 year? It seems arbitrary. The reason it's 1 year is because that's also the requirement, to my understanding, in the United States. And essentially what they're doing is harmonizing the two immigration systems in order to appease the Trump government. Massive, massive attacks. What this will mean is a large portion of undocumented immigrants being created, a similar situation to what you're seeing in the United States. Eventually, these people will have to be deported by the Canadian government. And again, the irony is that while Trump is attacking immigrants in the United States, Carney is paving the way for a similar operation here in Canada. Okay, maybe he doesn't deploy the Marines in the same way that Trump does, but they're setting the stage for mass deportations like Trump is. So I think this is a massive attack. We should call it what it is. It's a massive attack on immigrants, but obviously not only that.
Yeah, it's a huge, huge attack. Just a few other things. They can cancel, the minister will be able to unilaterally cancel permanent resident visas, permanent resident cards, temporary resident visas, electronic travel authorizations, temporary resident permits, work permits, or study permits. Pretty much eliminates due process on all of that. Yes, this is a theme of the podcast here. This is not a elbows up, stand up to Trump. This is a fall in line with what Trump wants. I guess they're trying to eliminate those irritants. But Trump doesn't seem to be showing any willingness to drop. I think they're probably doing that because they think that if they do that, then he'll give in on some of the trade stuff. But he hasn't shown any indication of doing that yet. So either way, this is a completely reactionary bill. Should be absolutely opposed, should be mobilized against. The other aspect of this, I mentioned it's being criticized by civil liberty groups, is the attack on democratic rights and freedoms. So this will allow police or border security agents to internet providers will have to provide information without a warrant on their clients. This removes restrictions on police opening mail. Right now, the police can't just open your mail. They have to go before a judge. They have to have a warrant. They have to have they have to have like a reason, and And also it makes the Coast Guard a maritime police force, although that is probably going to be irrelevant because I believe they're going to make the Coast Guard, as I mentioned, a part of the military. But yeah, this is really what this thing does, is it's not just attacking immigrants, it's an attack on democratic rights and freedoms in general. And yes, as you mentioned, it's happening exactly the same time as what's happening in the U.S. It's I saw a funny, I think it was a Beaverton article that said Carney stands up to Trump authoritarianism with Canadian brand of authoritarianism, which sort of sums up a little bit of what's happening here. But yeah, again on this, Carney is not the so-called lesser evil. I don't know. You can always make up, but Poilievre would have been worse. It's like, well, Poilievre's not in government right now. Carney is. And the speed and swiftness and the kind of the capitulation on the military, on the immigration, on border security, on democratic rights is quite astounding. It's been not even 2 months, a month and a half. And this is what this government has done.
Yeah, I read an interesting article from Globe and Mail, which is obviously a right-wing pro-business publication. But there wrote an article about the Conservatives, because the Conservatives are, if you notice, they haven't said much in the past month or so. They've been very quiet. Obviously, part of the reason is Poilievre doesn't have a seat at the moment. But I think a big part of the reason is that they don't know what to say. Because usually they'd be criticizing the Liberals for this or that, generally speaking from the right. But everything they're doing is essentially the Conservative program. There's this Globe and Mail article which was saying it's like, essentially they have nothing to say.
I saw Poilievre say, I have some advice for Carney. Borrow more of my ideas.
Yeah.
That was right after the election.
Yeah.
He's listening.
Yeah, well, I think he borrowed some ideas and then he came up with a few of his own.
Yeah.
But they're essentially implementing the Conservative Party's program, and I would say more aggressively and probably faster than if Poilievre was doing it. So yeah, the criticism, like for example, the criticism of the military spending, all the Conservatives say was, just maybe be smart about it. Okay. Invest, make sure you don't waste too much money. Make sure you spend it in a smart way.
Yeah.
But they fully support everything they're doing. How could they not, right? How could they not? It's a conservative program.
Exactly. Well, another one, moving on. Foreign policy. I think this is a big one. So how is this... I think a lot of people thought, the Conservatives, they're like Harper, you mentioned, they're like hawkish. And they're like, they're going to be bastards around the world. You can have your criticisms of the Liberals, but the Conservatives would be far worse. Well, how does Mark Carney shape up on questions of foreign policy? You want to start?
Well, I mean, I think it's worth starting with the G7. Obviously, we could talk about what was discussed at that meeting. There's some interesting things there. But I think the most interesting thing is who was invited. Obviously, Carney was the host this time. It was in Alberta. Of course, Zelensky was invited because, of course, Zelensky's always invited.
Yeah.
But also, Modi was invited, and he showed up. Mohammed bin Salman, leader of Saudi Arabia, was invited, although I think he politely declined the offer.
Yeah.
I think not for any political reasons. I think maybe he's just busy.
Yeah.
Busy, maybe with the situation in the Middle East potentially. You look at this. This is actually a very stunning development. Modi and Mohammed bin Salman have both been accused of complicity in murder by the Canadian government.
Yeah.
In the case of India, it was very recently.
Yeah.
I actually think they still don't have commissioners or ambassadors between the two countries. And in the case of India, the murder was of a Canadian citizen.
Yep.
And you remember, Trudeau stood up in the parliament. He publicly accused India. It led to a massive row.
Yeah, they broke relations.
Countries.
Yeah.
They broke relations. Now they're being invited to the G7. What's happening here? It reminds me of that famous quote, I think it's from Lord Palmerston, I think, that in politics there are no permanent allies. There are no permanent enemies. All there are permanent interests.
Exactly.
And then in other words, Carney, I think even more so than Trudeau, I would say, is inclined to, if necessary, tuck away all of this, fake talk. It was always fake talk about human rights and democracy and so on and so forth. Tuck that away in the interests of Canadian business.
Yeah.
And the fact is, the Canadian bourgeois are in a very tight position. They're not sure how things are going to pan out with the United States. And so what they're doing is they're hedging their bets, trying to, as much as possible, cultivate business relationships with other countries. And of course, if those countries have egregious human rights abuses, or even more, if they've killed your citizens, well, that's okay. We'll
forget about that.
We'll forget about that. Water over the bridge, bygones be bygones. And yeah, I mean, you saw it just this morning. There's a picture of Carney shaking Modi's hands. They have a new truce or whatever they called it in the relationship. No talk. Oh, and the irony of this, just before that meeting, the G7 passed a statement condemning what they call transnational repression, which includes foreign interference and assassinations in other countries.
Just hypocritical bullshit.
And just not a few hours later, they're having literally with a government they've accused of killing a Canadian citizen. That's what permanent interests are. And I think Carney is a bit more than Trudeau, I would say, a bit more inclined to move in that direction, tuck it away in the interests of business.
Yeah, so on that, in the game of imperialist world politics, with rise of China as an imperialist power, China has been, we've talked about that previously, they've been basically stealing trading partners of America. And when I say America, I do include Canada in that, because Canada's been their little buddy that kind of benefits from American imperialism. The main trading partner of most African countries is China, of most Latin American countries is China now, most countries in Asia. And then in this, there's two poles. There's a pole between America and a pole of China. And Russia is obviously united with China now. Iran, more or less, is in that sphere. There's been countries sort of balancing between the two, between China and the US. And some of those countries are like Saudi Arabia is one of them. India is also one of them. And so the US and Canada also have an interest in trying to win those countries over to their side. And so the whole kerfuffle with the assassination was unfortunate from the standpoint of Canadian imperialism. And Trudeau's comments were probably not what a lot of Canadian business leaders wanted to hear, or the long-term strategists of Canadian imperialism. And Carney's basically just bringing things back. And actually, it is permanent interest. They have an interest in developing trade ties. They're also, Carney had a meeting with Chinese, I don't know if it was a diplomat or ambassador, I believe it was, or minister. I can't remember. And they've agreed to have some relations with China. We'll see how far that goes, because obviously America is not going to like that so much. But they're trying to develop trade. Canada, and the whole point is Canadian capitalism is in a really, as you said, a really tight spot. And they need to have more trading partners, in addition to win India, Saudi Arabia away from China, Russia, whatever, yeah.
I would also add on this, on the question of India, that they also took Stephen Harper's advice on this. There's an article that came out maybe a few weeks ago. But what it was Stephen Harper advising the Canadian government to sever all ties with, he said, the Khalistani movement. Mm-hmm. So obviously the movement for Sikh independence movement, for a Sikh nation out of India, saying that in the interests of developing business ties with India, these people should be essentially, you should sever any relations whatsoever with them in the interests of developing business ties. That's effectively because we've had, actually one of the major protests at the G7, or of the G7, was precisely members of the Sikh community, who are horrified by the actions of the Indian government. But again, this is all small change in the interests of Canadian business. And they've effectively taken Stephen Harper's advice, which is, push these people to one side. We need the business. And if that means shaking hands with the man who's killing your citizens, then so be it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the needs of the capitalists, the ruling class, the needs of the capitalist system trump all other political calculations, and that's what we're seeing. On the question of foreign policy, moving on, I do think there is more. I mean, there's a war right now between Israel and Iran, started by Israel. As you know, if you followed it, Israel just unilaterally carried out attack. According to the United States, actually, Israel unilaterally carried out attacks on Iran. There's been, I don't know, I haven't checked the numbers. Last I checked, a few hundred people have been killed at least. Iran has responded. And I think this has also highlighted the hypocrisy of Canadian imperialism. If you remember, a number of weeks ago, there had been a bit of a slight pivot in what the Canadian government was saying about Israel. Mark Carney signed a joint statement with Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and Keir Starmer, the British prime minister, basically more critical of Israel than ever had been. They put some sanctions on some settlers in the West Bank and on, I believe they sanction Ben Gvir and Smotrich, two far-right Israeli ministers actually in the government. And this was, I think, performative. We called it out. It was just a bit of a performative thing. There was a lot of pressure, and now it shows that actually didn't really change anything. Because, just to give you an example, Anita Anand, minister in the Carney government, is she foreign minister? I can't remember.
Defense minister.
Defense minister.
Yeah.
She said, Israel bombs Iran, which you're not supposed to do, by the way. You're not supposed to do that. It's a violation of international law. And she says this. What does she say? Does she say, this is horrendous, we denounce this attack on Iran? No, she says, Canada is closely following the escalation of tensions between Israel and Iran. Nice way to put it, tensions, when one country bombs the other. Then Iran responds, and some rockets have gotten through the Iron Dome defense and they've hit some targets in Israel. There's been a couple dozen people that have been killed. And this is what she says. Canada condemns Iran's attack on Israel. Carney equally said, he said, Canada reaffirms Israel's right to defend itself and to ensure its security. Very strange that they say that. Does not Iran have the right to defend itself? Iran's the one that is being attacked.
Well, I think the irony here is that, or the funny thing, if you can call it funny, is that some of these statements were being made even before a single Israeli had been killed.
Yeah.
Israel has a right to defend itself while they're bombing Iran to bits.
Yeah.
It's like if a kid in a schoolyard viciously beat up another kid within an inch of his life, and then his mother came out and said to the kid who's been beaten up, by the way, he's got a right to defend himself when you inevitably retaliate.
Yeah.
This is really, really, and it shows how shallow and performative that statement was from earlier, which, by the way, even then, Britain was still providing surveillance and arms to Israel throughout that period. Canada is still selling weapons via the United States, still selling things like, I think it was a sale of, artillery propellants, which is used to send the missiles out. So this was always a bunch of hot air from the beginning. I mean, now we see it clearly.
Yeah, exactly. So more of the same in terms of foreign policy. And again, this is in the interest of Canadian imperialism. Israel is a key trading partner with Canada. Israel is a key ally of Canada and America in the Middle East. And Trump has, at first, you could tell he didn't entirely agree with what Israel was doing. It seemed like it anyway. But now he's full on. He's actually telling people to get out of Tehran because it's really going to be really bad, which I don't know if he knows how many people live in Toronto. It's not that easy. You can't just move that many people. Obviously, I don't think Trump probably even knows, and he might not even be serious in his comments, as is often the case. But he does seem to be giving a blank check endorsement for what Israel is doing now, and Canada seems to be following in suit. Again, a capitulation to, or you could call it that. I guess he's falling in. They're basically falling in line more or less with what the United States is doing on the world stage. So on pretty much every issue you can see, it's not fight Trump, it's not elbows up. It's and we said this at the beginning. Canada has been pretty much a key, basically united the Canadian economy, and not just the Canadian economy, but even politically has been very united with America on the world stage. It's been the little junior partner of American imperialism. And for that to change, that would be very difficult to change. And you can tell the politicians, for all their statements, people are disgusted at what Donald Trump's doing. They're disgusted at American imperialism in Canada. People look at it. And the Canadian politicians, they kind of try to talk out of both sides of their mouth. Mm-hmm. They want to tap into that disgust that people have. They don't like it, but then they also have to toe the line. And that's precisely what we're seeing happen, because this is capitalism. The economics trumps every other concern. And war is a continuation of economics by other means. And so this is what is determining the foreign policy of the Carney government thus far, and I predict now for the next number of years or however long they're in power. So yeah, this is really what we're seeing here with foreign policy. And
on other issues that we haven't even had, obviously we have limited time.
Yep.
But the tariffs have come down as well. We didn't even have time to go into that.
Let's touch on this, because the big one here is, according to the Liberals, they're probably saying they're doing that to lower irritants to get a trade deal with Donald Trump. But how is that going? So we could talk about the trade deal. We can talk about not just the so-called trade deal that they're going to have in 30 days, but also just the economy, the Canadian economy, and all of Carney's proposals. So maybe we could take a bit of time to discuss that before we wrap it up here. So yeah, how's that looking?
Well, I would just start by saying the idea that Canada could ever win a trade war with the United States was always a fanciful idea. I mean, if you look at it, we've discussed it on this podcast before. But you have a small economy which sends 80% or thereabouts of its exports to another country. That other country is the largest economic and military power in the world, which is not nearly as reliant on Canada as Canada is on the United States.
Yeah.
So the idea that in that situation, Canada could have ever won a trade war against the United States, this is just empty nationalist bluster, essentially. Also, if you look at it, very few countries retaliated against the United States. You know, when Trump announced Liberation Day and all these tariffs on essentially every major country in the world, the only other country, apart from Canada, that I'm aware of, that seriously engaged in a sort of tit-for-tat trade war with the United States was China, which is the second largest economic power in the world and does have a little bit of muscle. It can actually compete with the United States in certain things. It was China and Canada. So from the very beginning, this was a totally ridiculous idea that had no basis in the actual reality. Now what we've seen happen is that they've essentially been forced to reckon with the limited economic might of the Canadian economy. You saw this the other day. Trump increased the tariffs on steel to, I think, 50% from 25%.
Doubled them.
But what was interesting is that this time, the Canadian government did not retaliate. They didn't increase their own counter tariffs. In fact, they've actually withdrawn many of the existing counter tariffs against the United States. There was an exception created, which I think the way they framed it was U.S. imports essential to Canadian manufacturing. But the fact is that's a very broad definition.
That's probably most things.
It is most things. I think the estimates I saw was something like 60% of what was previously tariffed from the United States has now been exempt. So effectively, most U.S. imports are entering the Canadian economy tariff-free at the moment, despite the fact that the U.S. still has tariffs on steel,
Yeah.
tariffs on aluminum, tariffs on autos. One other thing I would add about this, part of Carney's financial projections when he was elected was based on tariff revenue. I think it was something like $20 billion. I think that was the figure that they expected to collect in tariff revenue. And of course, he used this to say, well, listen, we're not going to have to cut programs. We're not going to have to carry out cuts because we'll have all this revenue coming in from the tariffs. Actually, it's the same thing which Trump has been saying in the U.S. It's like, don't worry, even if the economy collapses, we're going to have hundreds of billions of dollars in tariff revenue. Now, Trump actually is collecting some tariff revenue. But Carney now, with the tariffs coming down, what happens to that tariff revenue? It disappears.
Very low amount of money.
Yeah. So this is going to, we talked about defense spending. This is going to be another factor that's going to magnify that this budgetary crisis in the next period. But again, I would just say this reflects the real relationship of Canada and the United States, that all of that bluster on the campaign trail meant nothing. This is the real relationship of the United States with and Canada.
So yeah, they're supposed to have a trade deal in 30 days. We'll keep our eye on that. But Trump has given no indications of relenting, and he's increased the tariffs. And Canada has actually been quietly, I may add. They haven't actually announced that they're eliminating tariffs, but they have been behind the scenes eliminating a lot of the tariffs that have been too punitive to Canadian manufacturing. They've also, a lot of these buy Canadian policies, if you remember, like procurement policies, or like I know a lot of liquor stores that wouldn't shelve American liquor, they've abandoned that in a lot of provinces. There's been a lot of abandoning of a lot of this because it actually is unrealistic. They're not able to operate that way. So yeah, I think it showed that was a lot of empty nationalist posturing, I suppose. And then when it came down to earth after a number of months, businesses and governments at different levels have realized that that's actually not possible. So yeah, I think on that issue, it does seem that Carney's getting nowhere. And it does seem like America's winning the trade war. Of course, I think we haven't actually really felt the full effects of this yet. I think that's something that's going to come in the next a few years. So we'll see. But yeah, we'll keep our eye on that for the trade deal. Connected to this is Carney said, in line with something Marco said earlier, something you said about he's overpromised, where he said, we can give ourselves, he said, we got to create one economy, not 13. He's promised, it's in the next week and a half, and by July 1st, by Canada Day, that they will eliminate interprovincial trade barriers. I think we can talk a bit about that. And he said, we can give ourselves more than they can take away, which I think is a ridiculous statement. No, Canada, through trading with itself, cannot replace the U.S. market. I think no serious analyst would suggest that, although Carney has promised it. But I guess the question is whether or not they can eliminate interprovincial trade barriers. And connected to that is, yes, they're trying to diversify trade. Carney has promised that they're going to be an energy superpower. Connected to that is these trade corridors, pipelines, things like this. And it's connected to eliminating trade barriers. But yes, this is also being criticized because it's the Carney's proposals seem to be running roughshod over Indigenous rights, environmental regulations, labor regulations. A lot of the trade barriers are actually in place to protect jobs. So yeah. What is that looking like? I guess we have a whole bunch of stuff here that it's not looking good. It's looking all bad from Carney. And it's probably similar to what Poilievre would do. Or I'm not even sure he would do some of this stuff. But it will lead to, attacks on... There's already Indigenous groups protesting, attacks on labor unions, attacks on the environment. Carney's promising, in typical liberal fashion, that they will prioritize decarbonized oil. I don't know what that is. I think that's a made-up term that doesn't make any sense. I don't know how you can have decarbonized oil. But yeah, the big thing here is that the different interests of the different provincial premiers has been something that we've highlighted. There's different economic interests. There's agricultural interests, products in the prairies. There's oil and gas in Alberta. There's manufacturing in Ontario and Quebec. There's the aluminum and steel. And all the premiers are kind of struggling to, Carney said you got to propose projects that are in the national interest. Yeah, so I don't know if you have a few words to say about that. Maybe we could cover this aspect.
A couple thoughts on this. First of all, I mean, this whole talk about one Canadian economy and bringing down trade barriers by Canada Day, which what's today? It's like June.
It's the 18th.
June 18th. So the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. He's got a couple of weeks to get it done. Obviously, it's a lot easier said than done, and we're seeing that now. Just to give one example, Nova Scotia was one of those provinces who came out very early and very loudly to say, listen, we believe in one Canadian economy. We're going to take down our trade barriers. They said it very, very confidently right out of the gate. I think they might have actually been the first province to do that.
Yeah.
But just a few weeks ago, they came out and said most of what they promised, they now have to retreat
go back on.
That they realize that it's going to be a lot more difficult because you have objections from professional associations who don't want changes to licensing, objections from the regulator. I think it was the Manitoba nursing regulator which came out against sort of a unified licensing for nurses the other day. And when you think about it, these are very minor things, very minor things. Licenses being recognized in multiple provinces, for example. Even that's too far. So this whole idea that they're going to bring down every last trade barrier in 2 weeks, unite the country, build these infrastructure projects that everyone agrees with and everyone benefits from. This is, I think, utterly fanciful. Also, this talk of building pipelines. Carney's expressed support for the idea of a Northern Gateway pipeline, so a pipeline going from Alberta to the coast of British Columbia. Obviously, Danielle Smith is very supportive of the idea, although I would add that there's no actual economic case for such a pipeline. As far as I'm aware, there's been no single company that's come forward and said, yeah, we'll build it. It makes sense. So you can make money off of it.
Yeah, Trans Mountain isn't even full, actually. It's operating now, but it's not even full.
No.
So,
and even that had to be built by the government. It had to be built by the state.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that's a separate point. But just the other day, I think it was the environment minister or one of the ministers of the BC government came out and said, no, it's not going to happen. You're not building a pipeline through BC. I think Legault made sort of similar noises a few weeks ago about a pipeline through Quebec. So it shows that, again, all of this beautiful talk about unity, about one Canadian economy, they're now having to come to terms with the actual reality, which is a weak economy and also a very divided economy. I'd also add that it's not just the provinces, it's like you said also, the Indigenous question. That, even if they do move forward with these infrastructure projects, let's say they get all the provinces to agree and they build this huge pipeline, that doesn't resolve the issue that in many cases you're building over the land of Indigenous groups who don't want it built.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. You've had, I think it was one of the chiefs or a group of the chiefs in Ontario said that if you go forward with some of these projects, and some of these bills that fast track these projects. Bill 5 in Ontario.
Yeah.
Carney's proposed something similar. They've said, then be prepared for something like the Idle No More movement, which, if people remember, was a very significant movement of Indigenous people involving demonstrations, blockades, and so on. back, I think, when Harper was in power
Yeah.
in 2012. So they're also going to have this issue to deal with. So in other ways, no matter what direction they move in, they're stuck. There isn't a way out. And I think this is the situation, right? It's very different from what Carney promised on the campaign trail, which was, like you said, a massive overpromise and a massive overestimation, if you like, of what he could actually realistically achieve. He said those things to get elected. I saw one article that called him Canada's moonshot prime minister. I think this is an accurate way of putting it, because he's promised things that cannot realistically be achieved. And I would say the consequences of this is that the disappointment is going to be that much greater when he does have to climb down and when he does start making these attacks. Because, there's the old saying that the bigger they are and the bigger they set themselves up, then the harder they fall. And I think this will absolutely be the case with Carney. He promised Canadians the world. He promised provinces everything Ford called him Santa Claus the other day.
Yeah.
And I think he was serious about that. It's like, wow, look at all these things he's promising. This is wonderful. But of course, the problem, with Santa Claus is Santa Claus does not exist in the real world. And, it's very traumatic when a child grows up and realizes that it wasn't Santa Claus. It was just his boring old parents the whole time.
There's not endless gifts for all your life.
Yeah. And this, I think, is going to be the realization that many people have. Because he is still popular right now in the polls.
He's very popular in the polls.
But a huge disappointment is being prepared in the next period. And this will have enormous consequences. I think this is a key point.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the economics are going to be the fundamentally determining factor in all Canadian politics. And the Liberals have had a revival under Carney. And Carney is still popular in the polls. You're going to have a honeymoon for a bit of a period of time. But what we're describing here, actually, there was a study that came out from the OECD, which is an organization of the top 38 economies in the world. And they put Canada almost dead last. I think it's almost dead last in the advanced economies. So things are not looking good. The trade war has not ended. They do not have a deal. And they've capitulated to Trump on border, military, foreign policy. He's dealing with an absolute mess of a situation. And so, Carney's popularity will not last. And the next 4 years are going to be extremely, if he lasts 4 years, let's put it that way, extremely rocky period. The popularity of this government cannot last. Like I said, we haven't even felt the full effects of a lot of this. But needless to say, Carney does not have a solution to these problems. And so this opens up a period of instability, political polarization, collapse in support for the government, and people coming to... We say this quite often, that for the masses of the population, of working class people, they don't learn from reading Marxist theory, but they learn from experience. And they learned a lot from the experience of Justin Trudeau. They did learn a lot, but now they have to go through the school of Mark Carney. And I think it's going to be a shorter school. I think it's going to be a bit different. And people will also learn the lessons of, like, Jesus Christ. We trusted the idealist young guy. We thought he was going to make things better, and everything got worse. And then we trusted this older, boring, technocratic banker. Maybe they'll eventually trust Pierre Poilievre. I mean, I think there's going to be a by-election, and he will be probably back in Parliament. And the Conservative Party does seem well placed to present itself as the alternative. Although, like we said earlier, Carney has been basically implementing their program. So whether or not they'll be able to find a space politically to counter the government will be another thing. But we believe, as the Revolutionary Communist Party, that the left is in a situation of confusion and demoralization. This is reflected in the election result of the NDP and in the general demoralized state of the labor movement. But that won't last forever either. That the crisis of the capitalist system, which is, we're seeing it reflected through Canadian politics now, is already creating radicalization of the population, of the working class. And this will open up a period which is extremely favorable to the refoundation of the revolutionary traditions of the Canadian working class, and the revival of the fight for a new society, the fight for a new world, not just the struggle for little piecemeal small reforms. Although we fight tooth and nail for everything that benefits Canadian workers, we're ultimately fighting against the capitalist system, because all of these things are happening not because Carney is a bad guy. I don't really know personally.
Probably is.
Maybe he probably is a bit of a bastard. He's a Goldman Sachs banker, you know. But I think you have to be morally questionable to work for an organization like that. But but because it is the pressures of the capitalist system and imperialism which ultimately is going to set the agenda and push through the policy one way or another of what they need, which is going to be decreasing living conditions, attacks on unions, attacks on indigenous groups, attacks on the environment to get what the ruling class needs. And this will create radicalization. This will force a lot of people to draw the necessary conclusions. And we are here building the Revolutionary Communist Party precisely to reach out to those types of people and to unite all those people in a political force that can propose an alternative way out of this nightmare. Because it certainly is not Carney who will lead us out of this nightmare. And he has been exposed. He is being exposed. At least we never had illusions in him, but I think he will increasingly be exposed in the eyes of millions of Canadians who had illusions in him. That is the situation that we are dealing with now. I don't know if you have any final words here.
Just to say that we're just at the beginning of this process, that it'll be a long, drawn-out process, but it's an inevitable process that, like we said, Carney is still, riding high in the polls. He's doing quite well, the last poll I saw. Also, things like military spending. You have to recognize that they do have public support for the time being. You can look at that, like a lot of these people on the left do, and draw pessimistic conclusions and say, well, listen, Mark Carney is still very popular. People support militarism. People support these measures. Therefore, we're in a reactionary situation. People are moving in a right-wing direction. But I think that's a very surface-level way of looking at things. There's a quote from Jean Chrétien, who was, which by the way, one of the people that Carney looks up to, carried out brutal austerity. In fact, the worst austerity in modern Canadian history while he was in government. But anyway, through that experience, he learned a few things, I think you could say, about public consciousness, about politics. But one of the things he said is, everyone wants to go to heaven. The problem is that nobody wants to die. In other words, it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to spend $100 billion more on the army. It's another thing to say, and to fund it, we're cutting your healthcare, we're cutting your social programs, we're closing down schools, we're closing down hospitals. That second part of the equation has not factored in yet.
Yeah.
But it will.
Inevitably.
Because that money inevitably has to come from somewhere. When those cuts eventually happen, whenever they happen, that's going to have profound implications for consciousness. When they start deporting people in large numbers, if they go down that path, this is going to have a profound impact. Look at what's happened in the United States. You had protests spreading all across of the United States when Trump moved in to deport these workers in LA. You could see something similar like that in Canada. It's a possibility. The Indigenous movement, when they start pushing through blockades, when they start arresting Indigenous people en masse to build these projects, that's going to have repercussions. We saw this a few years ago with the Wet'suwet'en blockade in northern BC, which, by the way, It wasn't just indigenous people protesting. That spread to other working people. That spread to young people in city after city. And it had public support as well. All of the ingredients are there for massive explosions on a whole number of different fronts. I think that's the perspective. It's not immediate necessarily, but everything is pointing in that direction. All of the ingredients are there for a mass explosion at a certain stage. And obviously, like you said, that's what we're preparing for.
Yeah, so I think that mostly does it for today. We are the Revolutionary Communist Party. This is the Revolutionary Communist Podcast. We are following political developments in Canada. We do this every couple of weeks, usually. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please follow us on YouTube or on whatever you use to listen to podcasts. Please share this podcast with your friends. And if you are looking to get involved, if you do want to if you're tired of being on the sidelines, please get in touch with us. You can go to our website, marxist.ca. We have articles on there about Canadian politics, about the labor movement, about the left in general, and connected to the Revolutionary Communist International about world politics. You can follow that on Marxist.com. So yeah, please get in touch with us if you want to get involved. Help us build that alternative to the nightmare of capitalism that we live under. And we have every reason to be optimistic because the situation is going to fundamentally change in the future. We are absolutely confident with that. We just need to build the political vehicle that can unite working class people and fight for a better world, fight for a socialist society where we can really put an end to all these problems. There's more than enough wealth in our society to guarantee good living conditions for all in harmony with the environment and indigenous groups, not like what Carney's doing, which is bending over backwards to the diktats of capital. But yeah, that requires a bold socialist solution, which is what the Revolutionary Communist Party fights for. So yes, I'll leave it at that, and I hope you can tune in next time.